Hello and welcome to SFI Not So Live with me, Jay Evans, your host. We've got a bit of a shift around of the panel today. We've not got Tony. He's away sunning himself, I think, isn't he, guys? So we are joined by the lovely Holly. Hello.
Hello.
For those of you who used to watch SFI Live or listen to the first few podcasts,
I think I did the first few podcasts as well.
Yeah, Holly might be recognisable to you, but you haven't been with us, so welcome back.
Thank you.
Maybe just for the newer audience, because we've got a new audience now, so maybe just a little introduction who you are and what you do at Saffron.
Yeah, so I'm Holly Andrews. I'm the intermediary team manager at Saffron, so I look after our telephone-based team, and that's a mixture of telephone-based BDMs and our help desk as well, just answering all new inquiries and supporting our guys out on the road. So, yeah.
There you go. Welcome back.
Thanks.
And Phil's with us, as always. Hi, Phil. Hi. No introduction needed for Phil. And our special guest for this month is the lovely Perdip. Perdip, do you want to do a little introduction to the audience for us? You have been on a podcast before, a couple of times, actually.
Twice.
Yeah. A couple of times. So maybe just an introduction to the new audience, please.
Sure. So my name's Perdip Korbachu. I'm a senior associate solicitor at Black Solicitors. We predominantly specialise in buy-to-let conveyancing, acting for specialist lenders, high street lenders, pretty much private landlords.
Brilliant stuff. And a great guest to have for what we're going to talk about. So just before we do start, some caveats from me. The opinions that we talk about on this podcast are that of our own, not necessarily that of our employers. We are going to be talking a lot of politics because this episode is going to be focused on the pre-election that we're in now. It's currently the 21st of June. Obviously, we all know that the election's on the 4th of July. So this is our take on what we see coming forward, I think. So that's going to be the basis of it all. So let's just start by sort of recapping what we said last month, Phil, and that was where we think it's going to go for the market, how the market's going to... how it's going to be. How has it been for the last couple of weeks? Has any of the election announcement affected the market in any way, or is it just standard?
I think it's been fairly benign, hasn't it, in terms of what's going on in the market, which is actually a good thing. We need, I think we've said before, we need some boringness just to calm stuff down a bit. Obviously, if we'd seen any seismic shocks, we'd have seen the Bank of England rate move one way or another. So that's a good barometer. There's not been a lot of radical mortgage pricing changes, and what's happened with the recent Bank of England hold has not been any surprise to anyone. I think we're all hoping for a rate reduction,
but we did think it wouldn't happen just before an election. They're not going to do anything, are they? They're going to hold off until afterwards, and they've got to be independent too, right?
Correct. So I think the Bank of England were demonstrating their independence quite rightly. And let's see where we end up next month, which is the next decision. Well, actually, it's actually August, isn't it? There's no Bank of England meeting in July. No. So it's going to be August. So that gives
August.
Yeah, that gives a bit of time for the dust to settle. Yeah,
which I think we're going to need.
The
way this election campaign is going, it's all very volatile at the moment, as we expect.
It's a bit of excitement.
Yeah, I love it. I like my politics, as you guys know. So this is a perfect time for me. So let's just dig a bit deeper then. So, Perdip, this is where you come in a lot as well. We've got a couple of policy areas and things that one thing's gone through, one thing's been put on the back burner. So we're going to talk about those in a bit. But let's just talk now about what the outcome might be for the housing sector after the election. So we've put together a chart, and I'll share this chart on underneath the comments on the podcast so you can have a look at it. But it's really useful analysis, actually, of the three major parties. I mean, we really should do all of them in fairness, but it kind of gives us an idea of where the Conservatives, Labour and Liberal Democrats sit with regards to the housing sector. So let's pull them apart and see if we think they're feasible, what you think's exciting, what you think they should be doing, whether there's anything in there that you thought, that's new, didn't expect that. And one of the things I want to talk about first, which actually is the third one down, first-time buyers, I want to talk about stamp duty. Because, Phil, we were talking with Tony was it last month or the month before, that stamp duty freeze or reduction is a positive and a negative for the market?
Yeah. I think, number one, the country needs revenue to pay for our NHS services, and we're all being told there's not a lot of money to go around. So you've got to balance that factor with fairness of stamp duty affecting first-time buyers. So it's optimising it so it's fair, but we still need to, or the Treasury needs to get some revenue in from somewhere. We understand it's not, personal taxation isn't really on the cards from certainly not, most of the parties aren't talking about personal taxation rises.
Yeah.
So it's got to come from somewhere, hasn't it? So it's been quite interesting to see where the parties stand on it.
Do you think it's more of a need for stamp duty reform, as opposed to, these sort of, what does someone call it, sticking plasters? The sticking plasters to fix something or think they're fixing something. Do you think we need a whole reform of the stamp duty system?
Well, there is an argument that the stamp duty system is rather outdated. I mean, it was done, the late 1990s. And then there was the sudden stamp duty holiday reliefs, which caused a lot of commotion for everybody in the industry.
Yeah.
So, yes, I think that there's scope for some work to be done, definitely so. And obviously, it's based on an old system. House prices were completely different at that point. The valuations, the market, the industry was a completely different market. So I think now that the market has changed quite considerably, yes, there is some work to be done. However, just going back to the previous point that I've made, if there are going to be any stamp duty reliefs, for example, or new schemes, I would just urge any government that is considering to do this, just to take into consideration the mortgage industry specialists, so the lenders and the solicitors and conveyancers like myself. Give us a little bit of time to adjust to this particular scheme, give us a bit more time to take it into consideration when we're working on live files, because previously, so it was a matter of the schemes come into place as at today. It caused a lot of commotion. It caused a lot of commotion in the sense of advising clients. Obviously, for files that were ready to complete on that particular date, we had to change things just so that we're ensuring that the right calculations have been made under the correct scheme. And that caused a lot of issues with clients as well. So that can be quite challenging. Obviously, we've managed to overcome those challenges. Then we also have a lot of private landlords that are looking to invest, because that's obviously what we specialise in, the private landlord sector. They're looking to invest, and their investments are based on further products that they're looking to take, which have really tight time schedules. So again, dealing with a very, very tight SDLT change in relief, trying to fit that into a tight schedule of completion, which is then going to have a knock-on effect on another transaction, is then going to cause a little bit of commotion as well. So from my perspective, that's exactly what I'd say. Also, when we're writing to lenders to try and submit for funds, if there's changes in stamp duty and clients are not able to provide the fees for that, because obviously we have to carry out source of funds for that particular thing as well. And in doing so, if there's an additional £30,000, for example, that we're going to need from these clients, they have to show us where they're getting that £30,000 from. Course. In terms of submitting the request for a drawdown of funds, we've done that in advance, had the money come in. If we're not in a position to obviously use those funds and complete on that day, we then have to abide by the lender's rules and have to send the money back to the lender. That can then cause a knock-on effect with applications. So there's a lot more involved than individuals think. So if the parties, whoever it is that's obviously going to come into power, just do decide that they're actually going to take into consideration people in the industry, if they can just take that into consideration before they come out with such schemes. Also, one of the issues or challenges even that we had with the previous schemes is that it was a pretty much a cliff drop.
They create bubbles. That's the problem.
Do.
Yeah,
they do.
And bubbles create spikes in house prices. So, I think fair to say the last stamp duty incentive we had, what people were saving on stamp duty, they're probably paying more because of it pushed house prices up.
But then at the same time, you've got it that it caused in the purchase market a lot more traction. But you also had cheap mortgage rates at that time.
True.
So now you're looking at it, if they did do a relief, it would do the house purchase market brilliantly. But then they've also got to think that your, interest rates have all doubled, not tripled in some areas. So it's all of those things. It's not quite the perfect storm it was last time.
And I love the fact you always put it with it's a first-time buyer's benefit, isn't it? But actually, we talk about this a lot. Being a first-time buyer is not really a good place to be. At the moment, it is. I mean,
affordability.
Beyond, affordability, more than anything else. And I think we need to sort the economy out before we start looking and thinking, well, let's start removing these reliefs and putting these reliefs in. So I think there was a lot to be said in that. And I think, we'll talk about leasehold reform later. But I do just want to bring up the renters side of things. There seems to be quite a bit of focus on here. But it's a no-fault evictions that everybody's talking about. So that's a good sign. I know we talked about that before, so we'll talk about that in a bit as well. But for me, the most exciting bit here, Phil, I know you're going to love this as well, is new homes.
Yeah.
The new homes targets. Weirdly enough, quite close together on Conservative Labour.
Similar
I was quite
across the market.
Yeah.
But it's down to the social housing side of things as well, isn't it? It's beyond, we've got to build, yes, we've got to build for buyers, but actually there are a lot of people in need of a home. And I think, do you think they're going to stick to these targets? I mean, the Conservatives have put it back in after dropping it. Are they going to stick to it? Are they going to get it? And is that going to be a vote winner for the public?
Not for certainly a contingency of, I suppose, voters probably under 40 who are the average first time buyer age now. Was it late 30s? I think it's 38 now or something. Yeah, average first time buyer age.
Which is shocking.
It is.
Absolutely shocking.
It is.
It's going to be appealing. It's great having these promises, 1.5 million, 1.6 million. Not a lot between those two, but is it deliverable? So it's having the foundations in place. So planning is planning reform is a big one. And again, four of the parties have said pretty much similar things around planning of brownfield and that. There's different views on Greenbelt across the parties, but I think planning is key. We at Saffron were heavily invested in the self and custom built space, aren't we, Hol? Yeah. So that's something that's really important to us because we think that provides more choice and more greener homes as well.
And it allows those first-time buyers as well for self-built to potentially build a house cheaper that would be a bigger footprint than it would be if it was just they were buying a standard new build that has a premium attached to it.
They're building for long term, to say, aren't they, rather than buying for short termers, which is what you're kind of getting at the moment.
And I think with the new homes thing, it's great for those that are in the position to buy, but there's a whole raft of people, as we know, the first-time buyer age is a lot higher now, so there's a lot still in the build-to-rent area. So it's having those new build sites that potentially have a lot of rentals on them as well. So, it's
I think that's what's missing in here.
Yeah.
From everything I've seen is a lot of focus on buying, but actually, and I would expect certainly from Lib Dems and Labour, much more focus on social housing.
Yeah.
I would expect that.
I want to jump in here, Jay, if I may, as well. We've quite rightly, Conservative Labour, Liberal Democrats, their policies, to be fair to, I think, the media and the press, they've had a lot of scrutiny, and that's right. They should be scrutinised because it's all right saying things, but are they deliverable? There's a fourth party in play this time, Reform, and I'm not convinced that they're getting the scrutiny as three of the other parties. Now, polls are indicating we're going to see a Labour government if they're accurate. So let's see where that, and let's see if that happens. But it's looking likely. But it's really important that we have an effective opposition that will scrutinise whatever government is in power. So they need to be held to account as well with their manifestos and their pledges. So my concern with Reform is they've not had some of that scrutiny. So one of the areas that hasn't been picked up that I thought was really interesting was they aren't planning to pay banks interest on Bank of England bonds for quantitative easing. Now, that sounds a great policy. Well, why should the big bad nasty banks get interest on their what they're investing in the bonds with B of E? But it's the implications of that. Now, I've not always agreed with the Bank of England governor, but I think he's spotting on this, is that banks are still going to need to, get their revenue. So that's going to push up interest rates. So I don't think that's been mentioned at all. So there's been commentary that actually it could be like Trussonomics on steroids. So I just think things like that actually need to be in an unpolitical way, but need to be scrutinised and looked at. Another area was relating to social housing, that prioritising for locals and foreign nationals are at the back of the queue. When I actually looked at the current rules for social housing, actually those controls are in place anyway.
They would exist.
The most local authorities, they do prioritise locals, and you've got to live in the area for a time anyway. So I'm just concerned there's some populist messages going out, but when you scratch below the surface, they're not always scrutinised. So I just think, in fairness, that some of the parties that are polling well should have a bit more scrutiny than they're getting. So anyway, I'll get off my soapbox now. But
to be fair, I enjoyed your soapbox because actually I think you're very, very right, and I think we're looking at a bit of a change in our political system. If Reform do as well as they say they're going to do, our two-party system might suddenly not be a two-party system.
Yeah, what we don't know is how the share will translate into constituents and seats.
And it's become even more difficult with the new boundaries as well. So actually, it's really hard to predict.
So let's see.
But see what comes of that, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. Scrutiny, we need it. It's a must, to be fair, because it stimulates development. And if we don't raise a voice now and scrutinise, then we're not going to have a voice to complain about later on. You've got to be able to look at what they're looking at, dissect it. It affects everybody in their daily life, exactly what we do, not just in our careers, but in our personal lives. So really, we should be scrutinising.
I've got a question for you. It's just related to the election, but just your opinion. Obviously, we all have a vested interest. We work in sectors that we have a vested interest in what's happening. We're talking about what these options are within housing because we're interested in it. But so looking at your friends, your family, people you know, are they actually that bothered by this election? Because I have to say, many people know I run a pub, so I see hundreds of people. It never gets mentioned. So I think there's a lot of hype with the media. And as you say, there's a lot more scrutiny than ever. But actually, do the public really read the manifestos, and do they just go with the flow? I mean, it's just an opinion, but have you heard anyone talking about it? Is your family, thinking, we can finally do something about this? We can fix, this party's going to really help with the cost of living. Are you getting that?
I'm definitely not getting it from my side. So family and friends, we've not really kind of discussed it. It's one of those things that we see things in the media, but it's kind of these sort of pockets of stories that you may have a small conversation of, but you don't go into the depth of, Labour want to build this many homes in their whole election for 4 years. So it's all of those things. It's kind of like some people just aren't bothered because they've seen this all before. They've seen the promises that they've gotten because the deliverables aren't there or they haven't delivered previously. It certain things, it's when those stories do impact you at one point, that's when you're bothered about it, but not when it's the whole, the whole government and the whole change. Yeah, I think for me, definitely with family and friends, it's not a discussion point.
No, likewise, it's all very mixed, isn't it? If you're working in a specific sector and you know that it's going to have an impact, you take more of an interest. But I think on a personal level, people are just either turning a blind eye to it completely because they just know that it's just going to be another government that are going to do as they please, regardless of manifestos. And I think that generally seems to be the view, unfortunately, as it stands. Yeah, we have a right to vote, so we should vote. And I do feel that we should scrutinise, especially for females. I mean, we've only had a right to vote for not so long. It's taken a lot to get to this point. Yeah. It's taken a lot to get to this point, so we should be voting.
Yeah.
I can agree more. And I think it's a little bit worrying, and I think turnout's going to be very, very low. I don't think many people are going to vote, and I think that's where the polls are going wrong. I mean, you can get lost in a bubble. If you go onto X, Twitter, it looks like the whole world's talking about it.
Yeah. I'm not a fan of the polls at all. I always think they've just got it completely wrong.
I've worked with so many panelling companies over my life and know how they're done. So I'm like, I like the experts. When you get the polling experts, they're really interesting how they work out the maths. I find it fascinating. Don't really believe them. So let's see what happens. Okay, let's move on because I think we could talk about that forever. But we are still talking about acts and law because we're going to come into this the second topic, which is the Leasehold and Freehold Reform Act. That's such a mouthful. So it became law but it's a bit flat, empty. Needs some work, don't you agree? And it's gone through just before the election now, so it's gone. So it's a bit thin on the ground.
Yeah,
really?
Yes.
my understanding is for it all to happen, you probably know better than I do, is we need secondary legislation to come in to make it all happen, and like we need court systems reforming for it to practically roll out. Is that right?
Yes, that's basically it. So it seems like it's a piece of legislation that the government have pushed through just before they dissolved to sit for the re-election. Now, for that reason, some people are saying that actually it's not been scrutinised enough. And we're going back to the same point. You know, it's got to have been tried and tested. It's got to have gone through the rigmarole that it should have done to ensure that it's a robust piece of legislation that's actually going to assist. Because the whole point of this legislation really is to provide a rather large reform to the mortgage industry, to the property industry, but specifically to leasehold properties. And the aim, I think, of the legislation really should have been to make the whole leasehold sector a very fair and affordable sector. However, if that piece of legislation hasn't gone through the scrutinisation that it should have done, then how can you say that it's going to? So what they do is they'll push it through so that it's been passed and given the royal assent. And then from that point onwards, it's then going to be given a second review, and then further legislation will come out as a result of it. So that's where you're going to get the detail and the guidance. So as it stands, you know, the original part of the legislation looks to basically ban leasehold houses. So all houses will be freehold. Excuse me. It also looks to change the way lease extensions are dealt with. So lease extensions will be standardised under a 990-year lease, as opposed to the current play, which you can actually set a lease extension, so it can be a 999-year lease, or you can set a smaller length if you wish to do so with the freeholder. But what they're looking to do is standardise it for freehold and for leasehold properties under the terms of this. So you can have what you would class as a freehold-style house, but it's actually a leasehold house. So they'll eradicate the houses. They'll all be freehold houses as opposed to leaseholds. Now, with lease extensions, the issue you have is that costs are quite significant in terms of extending. So there's lots of costs involved. There's the freeholder's cost for agreement, then there's the drafting of documentation, there's the filing of documentation, and that's only once you've actually agreed the sum that you're going to pay as a premium, which has a whole raft of legalities in the back of that. So there's also looking at valuation, so you've got to go back to a valuer to agree the valuation of the particular property itself in order to come to some form of agreement of the premium. Now, with this piece of legislation, there's got to be some further guidance, because there's no talk about the actual costs involved. There's no talk about the legal applications. Under the current terms as it stands, if you do not agree your lease extension terms, then if you have been living in the property for 2 years, so you meet the 2-year prerequisite ownership requirement, then you can make a statutory application. However, under this new piece of legislation, there's going to be no such requirement. You don't have to live in the property for 2 years in order to actually make that application to the freeholder to have the lease extended. But how is that all going to work? How much is it going to cost? What are the procedures? Currently, under statutory, there's a set time scale. So you have to serve a notice. You give the freeholder a bit of time to come back within a set time period. And obviously, if you don't get to the point of agreement at that stage, you then take it to a tribunal or a court. Now, this particular legislation doesn't cover any of that. So there's no timescales, there's no costs involved. It really does need to be looked at in quite a lot of detail to see how it's going to work in practicality.
Wow.
There you go.
Right,
that's summarised. I don't even need to go any
notes.
further on that.
Yeah.
But actually, just one thing I want to pick up. I didn't realise that it couldn't be used retrospectively either. No. So it's only new.
It is only new leasehold properties. So it's going to be any new leases that are entered into, and this is how it's going to affect it. So it doesn't take into consideration any existing properties.
Okay.
See, I didn't know that. That was something I think I picked up from your article, actually. And I will link to Perdip's article on this on these things as well. Anything you put out, I'll link from in the comments at the bottom. Yeah, so that's there we go. And I was trying to rush through, and I think again it was political point scoring. If I'm honest with you, they rushed it through because they knew they were going to put the election out, and they knew they could tick a box. Let's face it. Me being cynical Jay's out. So that was really interesting. But that leads very beautifully into the Renters Reform Bill, because that didn't go the same way, did it? And this is the one everybody's looking at, isn't it? Let's be honest. This affects a lot more people. And again, it wasn't ready. I think last time we did a podcast, I think you said that is a long way off
I did.
ready.
I feel like we've spoken about this on the last 2 podcasts.
I
think we've spoken about it for the last 6 months.
I was just going to say, and I feel like I've written a countless amount of blogs and various other conversations that I've had on this one particular bill, which they've now done a complete and utter U-turn and totally scrapped the bill. But in fairness, like I said, firstly, it was a long way off. There's a lot more time and effort that needs to go into it. In similar situations, I mean, the first reason as to why the government decided that they needed to hold off originally, because initially they said that it is a bill they're going to be looking at passing, and they were quite forceful with it, and then decided they wanted to take a step back because they need to reform the court systems. And the whole point of that is, if you're looking to do something so large as abolishing Section 21, which is the no-fault evictions, it's the largest piece of legislation under tenancy rules. Now, you've got to really look at the processes that you're going to put into place. You have to make sure that the court systems are sufficient and adequate enough to be able to deal with that. Currently, as it stands, there's no guidance. So for that reason, I'm not surprised at all. And that's just one of the things. There's all sorts that they need to look at. It's not just the court rules, the court system. It's also about digitalisation. How are they going to digitalise the system in order to equate for that? Because as a mortgage industry, we are pushing for digitalisation.
Yeah.
And similarly in the legal industry, that's exactly what we're trying to do. The quicker that we digitalise our processes and procedures, the smoother our transactions are going to be. And this is one of the things that they do need to take into consideration, which I don't think that they've considered at all.
You're right about that, because I didn't realise. I've been to several conferences recently where the digitalisation of the whole industry, there is a formal project underway.
It's been going for a while, hasn't
Yes,
it's
good couple of years
massive
now, at least.
step, but like they were talking about API codes and that. There's no formal consensus across the industry, so that's the first problem. So that's
and it has caused problems across the legal sector, isn't it? It's slowed everything down.
They were saying that, like, if you book a holiday, or airlines and every other industry has standardisation and digitalisation, and our industry is still bits of paper, like deeds on paper, and there's so many levels. So it's a massive task, but it needs to happen.
Of course.
And it will speed up the process as well, especially with the deeds for the land registry element, where there's still delays now, even 4 years on from the larger delays in 2020 and 2021. There's still that delay now, so any speed up a process will be great. But, the Conservative government, if they were successful, they want to then relaunch it and get the Renters Reform Bill back on track, where they've scrapped it now as one of parts of their manifesto.
Yeah,
it is. I mean, all the 3 parties, the one common element, I suppose you can see, is that they all want to abolish Section 21.
Yes.
So it seems to be that's the commonality between them. However, have they looked at a decent home standard? Because it's not just about digitalisation. It's also about looking at that decent home standard across the board for all the properties, be it the social housing or private housing.
Yeah.
For something of that nature to be successful and to be able to be used in the legal world, there are many things you need to take into consideration. And yes, I don't think that our industry is as digitalised as it should be. I mean, it's shocking. If you walk into a coffee shop, for example, the first thing you'll see is everybody on a phone. Everybody has a phone or a device or something in front of them. That's just the world that we live in now. So really, this should have been done a long time ago. But if they're going to be introducing new legislation under this particular aspect, yes, digitalisation, standardisation of exactly what, just as you've said, and also just making sure that decent home standard is across the board, because otherwise how are you going to enforce something so large as the no-fault evictions?
So there we go. You brought my point. I was going to say about the no-fault evictions. That's perfect. And I think it is something that really matters to the wider public, and everyone can have an opinion and think about it. And I think
I mean, the other point in the legislation is that they're going to be fixed tenancies. So currently our tenancies are all assured short-hold tenancy agreements, and they can be ranging from a set time period. However, these are all going to be 6-month fixed-term tenancies. So if you come to a point where you are looking to evict that particular tenant because that tenancy has come to expiration, and there's some talk about perhaps there being leeway in terms of providing a waiver for that 6-month tenancy. if a landlord's in a position where they can't evict that tenant. So that's another thing they've got to look at. I mean, it could be the personal circumstances of a tenant, for example. There could be various things that they can take into consideration. It could be that the property needed to have been improved in terms of health standards, but the landlord's not carried out those improvements that were due. And actually, the tenant has then said, well, I'm not moving until you've carried them out and you've been in breach of the legislation, so I'm not going to go. How are they going to deal with that situation? Are they going to waive the 6 months and actually just renew and roll on another 6-month contract? So there's so much more we can talk about with this piece of legislation. I could talk till the cows come home, honestly, with this.
And I think with it as well, it's the tenants, especially from the personal circumstances for that, they're tied in for that 6 months. If they're in a quality of housing that isn't up to standard, it's actually the tenant being knowledgeable enough to say, well, this is against the legislation, because a lot of people will stay in those houses thinking, well, I get a good rent, but, you know, there might be mould on the wall sort of thing, and that's impacting your health. You know, there's all these different things that is actually empowering the tenant to know that this isn't the right way to live.
Yes. Well, it's Labour's policy that I really like. It's the little young lad's name. Is it Awab? The young lad that died in social housing.
Yeah.
I think that really brings home how much people are living in and suffering in conditions that are not acceptable. And it frightens me, that social housing. But then again, social housing used to be a council-run thing, but now they're independent. And,
They are.
you know, it's very difficult. Things have changed so much over the last 20 years that I think they've dropped the ball. And I think, you know, it's good that they've all got that in there. They all mention it. So fingers crossed. We see some. Going to move on, 'cause time is flying, as always. We get talking. I keep looking at the time thinking, oh, no, you go again. Well, I want to talk, we'll come back to the other bits in a bit, but let's talk about inflation.
Yeah.
Because the news came out this week that we finally got to the 2% mark, the Bank of England love, which is great. But is it? I mean, I have an opinion, but I'll let you guys speak first. But I mean, it's, you know, we've hit the 2%, but are we kind of blinding the public a bit here by focusing on the 2%?
I think so. I think for, you know, the good news story is great. We've got to 2%, but there's certain areas on our day-to-day life and the services where we haven't reached the target, or we've only gone down a certain percentage. So I think, although the big news is that everyone sees that 2%, they think, here it is, you know, mortgage rates, could this help all our interest rates for borrowers? No, I don't think so at this time. I think obviously with the Bank of England base rate holding yesterday, and as we said earlier, not until the 1st of August are they going to look at that. I still think although it's a good news story, those people that may not know as much as people that are within the industry, then it could be.
But let's remember, we're talking about like food prices,
Yeah,
you know, and they're still going up. You know, so we're not in deflation. You know, it's still going up, but just going up less quickly. But you look at service inflation, that's not dropped to the same level.
Dropped. No. There is a concern that, as Hull said, it might go up again as all our energy prices. That's the increases work their way out after 12 months. There could be, there's a reasonable chance it could go back up again. So I think I understand why the Bank of England rate was held really to make sure there is a more long-lasting grip on that figure. Yeah.
What are our opinions on whether it will go up again? I've heard some stories that I think.
Sorry, inflation.
Inflation. Sorry, so talk about inflation. So obviously we're sitting at 2%, but I think there's a lot of talk. We discussed it last time that Rishi called the election because he saw something bad coming down the line. Or did he think, actually, we're going to get the 2% news the month that we're doing all our election campaigning? Call me cynical, but there must have been a reason why he suddenly went for the snap election. But there's lots of talk, and there's lots and lots of talk on various different channels, not just from one group of people, from lots of people, and actually within the parties, that they think is going to go back up again. What do you think?
I think that I think there is a reasonable chance that inflation may nudge back up, but I'm guessing the Bank of England will be they're obviously looking at the longer trends really. So if it's a one-off blip and then comes back down, then we'll probably then see the Bank of England rate come down. But if they're concerned there's more headwinds than anticipated, then we might see it held for longer. But I did listen to an economist this week from Yorkshire Building Society, and his view was still would be he thinks the rate will be about 4.75 by the end of the year. So
Okay.
that was his view. So he still thinks there'll be reductions this year, but it's when rather than and maybe later rather than sooner.
I think it's worth reiterating what we discussed last time as well, that they're never going to go back to what they were.
No.
We've
No.
had that period now.
Yes, most
Yeah.
definitely.
The low rates, the 1% will never come back, let's face it. But we have been blessed.
Yeah, as
Yeah.
Tony said in last month's podcast, the average Bank of England rate since the 19th century was somewhere between 4 to 4.5%. So, our low rates were outside that long-term norm. So, what we're 5.25 now. So, yeah, sort of 4.5 is probably about the normal, and it's adjusting to that after being in such a low rate environment for sort of over 10 years.
But the problem is, we're still in a cost of living crisis.
Yeah.
And what it's actually done, I don't know if you've seen the news today, but the retail index has come out and spending's gone up. Because people see good news, so inflation's only 2%, so they're now going out and they're shopping, they're doing more. So actually that's going to cause a spike again. So you're almost, you're chasing your own tail here. But my concern, I'm sure you guys agree, is the cost of living crisis hasn't been resolved yet. People affordability for first-time buyers is almost impossible. How are you finding it, Holly, from the lender side?
I mean, it's just that it's that affordability gap. I mean, on a personal level, my mortgage, I remortgaged at the beginning of the year and mine doubled. And as a first-time buyer coming in, it was a nice 2% rate. I'm now on 5%. So it's all of those, those first-time buyers that managed to get on the market are now having a bit of a shock that, okay, you've got to find double your mortgage now elsewhere. And how are you going to find that, as well as put in your own sort of, your fuel, your commuting to work costs, your food, which is extortionate at the moment. So it's all of those things that maybe weren't factored in. So that I think that's probably potentially why the housing market from a purchase side has definitely slowed in getting those first-time buyers on, is because actually overall it's not just being able to afford the mortgage each month, it's then affording everything that surrounds it, your utilities bill, your food bill. It's sometimes almost off-putting to those first-time buyers to think, actually, the rent cost compared to the mortgage cost now isn't that much different. Whereas obviously before, rent, it was a lot more than your mortgage would be. But if you hadn't got the deposit, you would kind of put into rental. Whereas now, they're kind of equally balanced.
I think that's going to continuation of the inflation, to be fair, as well. I mean, we've concentrated on the inflation drop, obviously, the 2%, but really, what is the impact it's going to have on the sector in the industry? So for lenders, it's going to potentially give them a cheaper swap rate, which means they can then produce more competitive offers. But I think that's going to be a short-term fluctuation within the industry, because the real test really is that affordability test. It's not necessarily the inflation dropping, because if that was the case, if the Bank of England had then dropped the base rate, then that would have had a knock-on effect. But concentrating on one without looking at the overall picture is going to be a very, very construed view of what you're looking at, because really, cost of living is still quite high, and it is going up, and that's not come down. So although inflation may have come down, the cost of living still hasn't. So that affordability test, that stress test that individuals were trying to pass, are still going to be unfortunately stuck at that particular same stage.
Yeah, you're right, because as lenders, most lenders, we use Office of National Statistics, ONS data, to assess affordability. So if that's still high, then they're not going to pass the affordability assessments, and we have to, as a lender, we have to stress test unless it's on a fixed rate of 5 years or more. We have to stress test
and that's
at a
the
higher
thing.
rate.
Like nowadays, people with the rates, because it's so unknown of what the rates are going to look like over the next 5 years, people aren't wanting to tie in for 5 years, because actually they think, oh, maybe it will go down. But then also it's thinking, actually, in the grand scheme of it, it may actually go up even further. So it's just that for those people, again, it's that outside of the industry, it's just trying to educate people to say, actually, you haven't got a crystal ball. Nobody's got a crystal ball to know what it's going to look like in 12 months' time. But at least knowing that for actually tying in for 5 years, it will boost your affordability, but you just don't know where you might quite be in those 5 years and how the market will have changed.
But I mean, with the inflation drop, if that had given the Bank of England the confidence to then make a difference to the base rate, then we could use a little bit of the crystal balls that we do have, because we have a little bit of knowledge being in the industry. But really, we don't have that confidence. So I do feel there is going to be a drop, just as you've said, but I think it's going to be a drop in the base rate towards the tail end of the year, just as you'd mentioned. I don't think they're going to have that prospect. So it'll be interesting to see what happens on the 1st of August when they sit again and consider it, because that would be one of those points of, watch this space and see where we're at. But actually, let's see. And the impact it's going to have on the industry for now is, I don't think it's going to be a volatile change whatsoever. I think as we're standing, we'll probably be in the same position in the next couple of months. And depending on all the different schemes that the government then bring in, there may be a change, but it'll be short term.
There we go. We're running out of time. I feel like I say this 5 minutes after I get behind this microphone, but we are running out of time. And I think we could talk forever on this.
Yeah.
So we are, just a reminder, we're recording on the 21st of June. So we are a little bit away from the election. Will you be staying up to watch?
Not all night, but I normally
not.
stay up to about 12, 1 p.m. Just to,
you kind of get the snapshot by that time, don't you?
Feel where it's going. Yeah, I always get excited for the exit poll, because that's normally right, but not always. I'm old enough to remember when they have got it wrong. But that's the exciting bit for me, when they have that. Is it 10 o'clock? The bongs go. And
yes,
you get the exit poll. That's I always think that's quite exciting, but maybe I'm a bit sad.
That's the bit I'll watch. I'll just wake up early in the morning and catch the rest. But just one last thing from you, something that we discussed that would be really interesting. One of the things that both Tony and Phil have said is the parties don't seem to be putting someone from housing into strong cabinet positions. It's not around the cabinet table. Is that something you'd like to see from a legal perspective?
Oh, most definitely. We certainly need a voice. And I think there are a lot of organisations out there, organisations that I'm a member of as well, that like to take that voice to the relevant people so that they can then reiterate what we're doing. But definitely there needs to be a voice.
Yep. Good. We all agree. Holly, do you agree?
I agree.
Good. There we go. So that's it. The pre-election chat's over. So the next time we meet, Phil, we will be talking about what's happened since. So this could be quite an interesting conversation for the next one. So we're following on the theme. We'll have 3 election-based conversations, 1 month after the other. But thank you, guys. Patrick, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me again, guys.
It's nice to see you in person. It's nice
definitely.
We much prefer this. And Holly, welcome back.
Thank you.
We'll have to send Tony on holiday a few more times so you can join us.
He can have as many holidays as once. 2 6-month holidays a year if he'd like.
You don't mean that. You'll be stuck with that.
No, I miss him terribly already.
That's brilliant. And thanks again, Phil. And thank you for listening or watching. If you are listening to us on Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts, head on over to Spotify, where you can watch the video version, which is a lot more interesting. And that's it from us. We will be back again on the 1st of August, so post-election, with our analysis of what's happened since. So for now, goodbye.